Welcome back, everybody. We are here at 5 a.m. on the 24th of November. This is 12. Well, I keep counting. I think we're at 17 sessions. Yeah,
I'm
we're
not
at
doing
seven.
math.
We're doing. I think we're at 17 sessions. I'm joined here with co-director of the Tea Festival, Ryan Moen. Um, he's been with me this entire time. If you're just joining us, we are also joined by Jared Varani. Jared Varani used to work at Jaga Silk. He was instrumental in setting up the the kombucha program here at Jaga Silk. We brought him onto the show today to talk a little bit about fermentation. There's a question I've been dying to discuss, which is does tea even have an impact in fermentation? So that was going to be kind of what we were going to discuss a little bit here. And I consider Jared to be an incredible wealth of knowledge, and it's good to have the Jared Squared happening again. How's it going, buddy?
It's going well. It's going well. Nice to be up at this hour of the day. I feel like you really get a good sense of getting ahead on things.
Oh, we're so behind on things. We're coming at it from the other side.
Yeah. How long has it been now? 17 hours, you said?
Yeah. I'm looking at the stream. We've been live for 17 hours and 11 minutes. So yeah.
Well, keep the tea flowing.
Yeah, keep the tea flowing. Keep the kombucha jun flowing. It's good times. Yeah, Ryan Moen again knows Jared Varani, of course, from his time here. Jared was at the various tea festivals representing, talking not just kombucha but also some of our other selections as well, and talking about our matchas and our teas and all that fun stuff. But what maybe you want to talk a little bit about what got you interested in fermentation in the first place, and what drew you to kombucha and beginning the program here with us back in the day, back 5 years ago now.
Good question. Myself, like many others, I think, were and are drawn to kombucha for their health benefits. I distinctly remember receiving an email from my dad's good friend, who was also a personal trainer, that was outlining a sauerkraut recipe. And after reading through it and going further down the rabbit hole of fermentative functional foods, I became increasingly more interested in fermentation, probiotics, and their relation to our own health. And specifically, having studied, or as I was studying biochemistry at UVic, I found the overlap between the two subjects very fascinating. And I remember writing in one of my classes for an assignment about fermentation through a more taxonomical biochemical lens.
And having that connection, being able to talk about it that much more in that much more depth, I can imagine. That's interesting. So there was that connection piece between your interest in health, your uncle doing some ferments, and then the study that you had chosen to take on, and that's what brought you into this world, I guess. And you came in after, I think, shout out to Eric over at Township Coffee, good old Eric. I think he was
Township.
Township. Yeah, he's good people.
I just cracked into it.
Yeah, I'm on this. Okay, we unfortunately. So for our viewers, the plan was the plan was, and I just found out that we could have done it. There was a courier. I was going to have courier over a bottle of our kombucha from Maria's Gelato in Langley, to Jared Brani in Vancouver, and it didn't happen. So you don't have one of our bottles right now.
It might be for the best. I had some dental work yesterday afternoon.
Aha. Okay.
And so the face is still somewhat sore, and might be for the better that
you're not.
I keep to some other teas today.
Vicarious enjoyment, sir. This is, you know what's.
I've been
look at that.
Craving it.
Look at that. How gorgeous does that look? Like, can you see that? Like, I gotta hold that up to the camera. Like, look at that.
I really do miss it.
Yeah.
You miss the taste or the brew when you're saying that? Because you used to be in there for many hours in that place that Jared's been in for many hours. Jared Squared, of course.
A good question.
We call it Jared.
I imagine both. Definitely the taste, and I think also I was having a craving for energy drinks. I was at a Japanese market and picked up one of those small like energy bottle shots, and I was thinking to myself, if only I had a bottle of kombucha right now, that would be the perfect thing.
It happens a lot.
And so yeah, I miss the taste, miss the flavor, and the room. I think I'll have a nostalgia for that will carry with me for many years to come.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's a very transformed room. Back when Jared was working with us, he was trucking 4-liter jugs of cold water into these 15-liter and 30-liter heavy clay crocks that were meant for sauerkraut production, and producing, like 10 of those. 10, we called them FUs, fermenting units. It was our tongue-in-cheek abbreviation for the process. And now we have it all done in one unit, and it transfers over to another unit that chills it. But you used to transfer each one into a keg. You take that into the fridge and chill it. As part of the process that we worked on together, where you came up with this idea of, hey, why don't we cold crash that yeast to clarify the bottle and make for a more shelf-stable product without necessarily using some sort of filter. We wanted to keep it unfiltered, but you were like, we can filter it, but using a just a kind of reduce the amount
gravity.
And reduce the amount of activatable yeasts, I guess, in the system. And it's done wonders. I can leave bottles out of the fridge literally for months on end, and some of them, if we do it really well, like the really ideal brews, I can leave them out and open them up, and they're not gonna foam everywhere. That's not true of all of them, though, and it does bring us to our talk, which is, does tea have an impact on this fermentation? So, we have tea, we have fermentation. The Noma book that was been really inspiring me for fermentation. Talks about how, and I don't know how many of our viewers know this, but like, tea is not even required for kombucha, and we call ours kombucha jun because we're not convinced that kombucha and jun are different. We're just we got ourselves what was technically what was sold as a jun scoby because it consumed honey for its fermentation, but we've since come to the conclusion that you can guide the scoby in a different direction. You can take it with and give it different sugars or different teas, and as long as you coax it slowly, it's going to survive. You just can't give too massive of a change too quickly, right? But in the Noma book, it says you don't need tea. We've experimented with that. You've made some really interesting honey-only kombuchas, right? Where it was just the SCOBY, honey, and water. There was no tea at all. And we had successful ferments. And it's logical, right? You just need bacteria, yeast, a sugar source, and the right growing environment, and you have a fermentation.
Right. I think many people, their first inclination is to think in more structured lines of what something is.
Mm-hmm.
And myself, I was the same. And it wasn't after asking these questions about where the boundaries are and trying to think a little bit further outside the box, I think impelled by a certain drive to keep innovating and trying out new things, experimenting in the kombucha room. And microbes are very resilient. Oftentimes, they, there's many different kinds of microbes, and it would be naive to paint with broad strokes here. But yeast, for instance, doesn't need a whole lot to survive.
Right.
As long as you have a good sugar source and some trace nutrients along with a nitrogen source, you most likely have enough that the yeast can grow from. And one of the reasons being is that they can synthesize all of their amino acids. As humans, we have, I think, 8 essential amino acids that we need to obtain from our diets. Our bodies don't have the genes that are able to create those amino acids. However, with many microbes, they can. And so if you give them a sugar source, they will be more or less content. And you need far fewer of other components for life to continue.
In the world of the yeast. And
in the world of the yeast.
Yeah, there's this. That's interesting. So you can get away with honey, which I'm curious where the nitrogen comes from, but I guess there might be oxygen element. Like what is creating? You said nitrogen is required. Like where does that come from in this? That's an interesting. Is it in the bacteria that we're giving it? Is it in the SCOBY? Like where? What is?
That's a good question. I would imagine that much of the nutrient could even be coming from the previous SCOBY that was added to the mixture. Oftentimes, microbes are very good at recycling their own and reusing the nutrients from previous generations.
Could we? Is there going to be a saturation point, and can we keep making honey kombucha over and over and over again? Like, does the tea matter? Do we need tea? Like, tea is going to have nitrogen in it. That seems like a really good source for trace minerals as well. But
I think
is it a requirement?
It would start to matter when the limit becomes those materials. And it's going to be dependent on your honey source, your SCOBY, and if those are devoid of nutrient to begin with, I think you'd hit that limit much sooner. And tea would be, like many other foods, a good choice for adding extra nutrient. Although, as we've seen, I don't think it's necessary, and clearly there are many other substitutions that could be used in its place that fulfill those nutrient requirements.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because we found that, like, what I've kind of answered this question for myself is, I got to a point where I was like, okay, tea doesn't matter. I can not have it in there. I can really use different botanicals, but like we were discussing with Charles a little bit earlier, and with John Patterson, just like the idea of having and developing tannin to when you have an acid, it seems to really help to create more complex flavors. And so I thought, okay, the tea, what it brings to the table is a contribution to that finished flavor structure. So sure, we can develop a SCOBY. Sure, we can continue to ferment without the tea playing a role. But the role that it does play is more of a contributor to that finished flavor structure, and to give it some balance, and to, like, this is a really lovely, like, I'm drinking this Yunnan and Diazong that we've cold brewed, and we've utilized for our preparations, and I'm just like, okay, this is delicious and everything. And one of the biggest things I think it's doing is it's got this lovely acid with the sweetness. It just tastes really balanced, and I'm really happy with it. But without it there, like, especially, we've done the rooibos before, right? The honey bush and stuff, and it's delicious, but it's like super sweet, right? Like, I don't really get. It's harder to develop it, and I've noticed that we've been using, since we started using the Brix meter for measuring residual sugars and the pH meter for that pH, and we're just like making this hard decision that we're not going to stop the ferment now. This is something that we started doing since you moved on, man. Is we do not stop that ferment until we hit 7. Even though we know the Brix is not going to be perfectly accurate, there's going to be issues about cloudiness interrupting our accuracy. We commit to the 7, and it's interesting what happens as a result. And it takes a long time sometimes when we don't have the tea. The tea seems to also improve the speed, and I guess talking to you now, it makes sense having those trace minerals, having that nitrogen, because it contribute to the ferment is gonna make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's also a worthwhile point to go into on why the tea might be required. And I think there's a conversation to be had about the nutrients they're providing, but also, like you're saying, the taste. I think tea as a botanical lends itself well to the fermentation process, and I think it could be required in the sense that the flavor structure is lacking without it, and I think that's what we found.
Yeah, and also, it also there's a couple other, I think, interesting sort of results we found while you were working with us, and one of them was that green teas, as much as they're supposed to be a part of the Jun experience, ended up producing such a vigorous, almost like overly vigorous fermentation, to the point where it was so fat it felt like the SCOBY couldn't form properly. Like, it was we hear a little bit about Jun makers talking about like a gloopy SCOBY, but to me it's like it's a SCOBY that hasn't had a chance to form yet, is kind of the perception that I end up having, right? And that when I give time for the SCOBY to go through its development phase and finish, it really seems to be beneficial to use teas that aren't green. And the only logical conclusion I can come to after looking at some different scientific research, discussions with yourself, also some anecdotal research, is that there's just a significantly increased amount of both nitrogen and yeast activity in the green teas that are just going to promote like a super powered ferment, right? And so the tea can be a massive contributor to the fermentation, especially when it comes to greens, and it can actually take it into a trajectory that's a lot harder to control when one of our goals might be slow fermentation for greater flavor complexity and greater safety on the shelf, so that it's less it's not going to foam all over the place.
I think that's an interesting topic, the rate of fermentation. And what I've noticed with a lot of customers that would stop by at previous tea festivals, they would often, and even at the shop, they would often talk about how at home their fermentation would be too slow. And I would often say that we had the opposite problem. And so I think, depending on how quickly your fermentation is going, you might want to choose one kind of tea over another. and we've certainly found the same in our settings, that it goes too fast in certain conditions with more nutrient viable teas, and that we found that slowing it down by giving it teas that have been more withered and less nutrient available is an effective strategy.
Yeah, there seems to also be like a role. Like I thought, what was fascinating is what we discovered with this the potential behind using puers in fermentation. How there seemed to be an interaction with the Aspergillus. What is the name of the mold in or the bacteria in puer? Do you remember? There's I can't quite remember.
Or orensis, I want to say.
I think it might be orensis. Yeah, Aspergillus orensis. I think. Anyway, it floats around in Yunnan. That's why you got to make your dark teas to qualify as a puer in that area. Is there's a particular basically the air is going to inoculate the ferment in the area. But that particular bacteria seems to work with the carbon dioxide in the liquid a little bit differently than others, and it seems to almost make it creamy like a Guinness. Like there's this fining of the carbon dioxide in the ferment, and I just find that so interesting that like we could use a particular tea, in this case a genre almost. I mean, there's dark. It's within the dark tea genre, right? And you can use these puer cakes to ferment with, and get this finished product where it doesn't seem to ever really over foam. Like even when there's a good amount of residual sugar, I feel like it almost traps it. Is what we found from the research.
Right.
Is that and it's so silky. It's such an ideal flavor, and I'm actually getting a little bit out of this one. Hey, like we're doing this Yunnan Diazong, so it's from the right region. It would stand to reason that there's this bacteria in the air when this tea was produced as well, and then using that for the ferment. It reminds me a little bit of the results that we were getting from those puer cakes in the fermentation.
Right, and I think we noticed something similar when we made the batch 500 with chaga. And
which is interesting, right? Because they're unrelated, but they taste similar. It's this weird. What is that, right? Like
I want to say my thinking on this may point more towards the physical chemical properties of the liquid. Carbon dioxide can dissolve into water.
Right.
However, if there is a nucleation site, it's not always stable, and sometimes you have some molecules of carbon dioxide that bump into others and form bigger bubbles and come out of solution. And so if you have a solution with more molecules that can anchor the CO2 and hold it more stable, it's likely that the bubbles will be smaller, and it's will also be less likely that you'll have them forming larger bubbles and coming out of solution quicker.
Right. Like green teas kind of almost have that opposite response, right? Like or it creates that opposite reaction where they're like almost like pushing the CO2 out of solution and creating a more vigorous foaminess, whereas the puers are again the other side of that coin, where they're trapping them in a little bit deeper and keeping them and also tightening them. Like there's an interesting. Yeah, I found it so interesting just how silky those bubbles got too. It was really interesting how that they contributed to texture.
Right. I want to say it points either at how slowly the carbon dioxide has been formed, lends itself to a more stable conformation within the liquid,
Mm.
or potentially in the brews we've noticed that have a finer texture, there is some compound that is helping to capture the CO2
Makes sense.
and keep it stable and fine. And I think some tests could be done by adding some compounds in that might have this effect
Right.
to a green tea. And
Something makes me think that that what makes a green tea vigorous is that it's just such an amazing food for the fermentation. Like it makes the SCOBY. Maybe it's not the SCOBY. Maybe it's the yeast. I think it's the yeast that gets really really zazzed and really really likes it. And I bet you that the way to interact with green tea is in a more effective way might be to have a clearer and more concrete control over the temperature of the ambient temperature in the fermentation room. That by dropping down the temperature, slowing down that yeast development a little bit by say like trying to ferment at more like 16 degrees centigrade instead of the 20 that's our goal, would be more conducive to greens being involved in this process. I think that might help, and maybe choosing teas that are less nitrogen rich, like rather than working with Japanese greens where there's nitrogen actually added to the soil, for the work with parched Chinese greens where that same practice is not happening, and might be slower, so like worked with parched Chinese greens at a cooler temperature would probably open up the door to some more sophisticated fermentations with green teas. Is kind of the thought process that.
yeah, it seems like these are some more advanced concepts and how to manage the rate of your brew.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are a lot of parallels that are done in the beer industry,
Mm-hmm.
where the craft beer industry is looking very heavily at these metrics,
Mm-hmm.
taking detailed analyses of the nitrogen content, the sugar content, and extrapolating with software as well how the fermentation is going to proceed.
Hmm.
And I think, like many other things that we've done with kombucha, this is another area to draw from other more developed fields. And I would expect to see this, if not already happening, in other kombucha operations as well.
Hmm.
And so it's a goal of mine to continue to develop kombucha in that way, and hopefully there will be areas of kombucha that other fields then borrow from at some later date.
I think I would love to borrow from, like I was talking earlier in the broadcast about some parallels, uh, like the length of a ferment and how like stretching it out for a longer period of time helps to layer the yeast and layer the flavor complexity. But in balsamic vinegar and Modena, I was explaining to the viewers that it was really interesting to see them transfer between different wood like barrels, and having the storage container contribute to that end flavor. It'd be really interesting to do kombucha, I think, and explore what that storage container or that fermentation vessel does to the flavor. I think there's so much room to play there with oak and cherry and maple, and it'd be really fascinating to get these different barrels and see how they would interplay and draw out different flavor dynamics from the kombucha ferment. It'd be just absolutely fascinating.
That would be awesome. I feel like it's a natural progression of a lot of craft breweries. It seems as though at some point along the line you'll see their barrel aged sort of experimental line.
Just seems so interesting. I've always kind of dragged my feet at moving to steel. I remember originally it was glass all the way, and then it was, okay, if we can't do glass, and ceramic all the way. And it was a really kind of a big hesitancy to ferment in steel. And I remember one of the original tests in these larger vessels was a failure. And it felt like, oh, that's not very good at all. But it ended up being that it was just larger, scaled up, meant that there wasn't as consistent of a yeast distribution within the vessel. And so now that we stir the ferment part of the way through the fermentation, it's made a huge difference on how, the flavors come through at the end. Like, what are you thinking of this kombucha, Ryan? You're the one drinking it with me right now.
I feel like the effervescence of it is really lovely. I mean, you're mentioning a bit more of a stout beer, but it tastes almost more champagne to me. But I was thinking, just like my mind was spinning off, thinking about barreling and wondering how much nutrients. Well, and again, this is probably not something that Jared Barani will even postulate at, but I'm curious to see, like, if you just got sugar, water, like, could a SCOBY start to consume a cask, like a keg, and like, could you just brew based on the flavor of the keg? I mean, that's how bourbon came from the whiskey trade and sherry kegs, right?
That's an interesting point. From what I have heard, I know in terms of the flavor, there are three sorts of reactions that you can consider with regards to the barrel and the aging process. Those that happen within the liquid from molecules that hit each other and form new molecules. Those that happen in between the liquid and the barrel, something reacting between the two. And a third kind from new molecules that have been generated from the aging process that then react to form something new entirely. And I would imagine that in terms of providing nutrient, that the dry kind of barrel might not be the most lending for something that the brew would use. I think it might be more of a finishing kind of purpose, and I would be curious to know. I always try to imagine things on a much smaller scale. It'd be really neat to see what's actually happening between those two mediums, and see what kinds of molecules are being shared and created between them.
Yeah, it would be really interesting. Just to have a way to measure that, hey? Yeah, that'd be really, really fascinating.
There are a lot of great chemical and other types of sort of structural analyses that can be made. One of the things is you need very expensive equipment to do them.
Yeah.
My other dream is to have a chemistry lab in another room.
Yeah, totally.
And we could then test these things, and we could look at them, and so it's possible. And one of the hopes in the future is that there will be a kind of university type partnership where both parties are investigating something in the liquid.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was watching some articles. Watching some talks by Christopher Hendon, and that was a University of Berkeley, I believe, teaming up with some coffee shops and using like some pretty sophisticated multi-million-dollar equipment to bounce. I think it was atoms off of like coffee molecules to measure extraction, and it was this amazing technology that's being used. It would be pretty cool to be able to have that kind of partnership with a university with some specialized equipment and be able to look at this stuff in some really great detail that would be impossible for a private company to afford. Be like borrowing the Hubble telescope to take a look at the.
We'll need a convincing argument, and I'll have to think on that.
Get to work. Yeah, awesome. It would be great, though. It would be really, really interesting to be able to see this. I think now I think we've kind of answered our question. Hey, like if I think it's a resounding yes to me. I wasn't sure, honestly, like even as much as a year ago, that tea did have an impact on the flavor. I kind of convinced myself that it was just an accident, that it didn't really play as big of a role as people think, and that scobies and the sort of interaction with yeast and sugar was so much more paramount, and that tea just, I think the role that tea plays, just to kind of bring it back, is a little bit slower. It's kind of like you only miss it when it's gone kind of role that it plays, but it is one that becomes more important the more fermentations you do with the same SCOBY, is what I'm starting to understand. And also it's a flavor guide or a flavor creator, or a structure maker.
Yeah, I think another idea that comes to mind, I heard this in different contexts, that the fate of alcohol is vinegar. And it's likely that for many millennia, yeast have been producing alcohol, and that has been getting turned into vinegar by very similar processes.
Makes sense.
And I think, for maybe by definition, when we talk about kombucha, we consider it to contain tea. Mm-hmm. And likely we may have looked back in history and found examples where there was a quasi kombucha of other alcoholic starts that could have been a precursor to what kombucha is today. Mm-hmm. And I think it's under that scope, that definition of kombucha containing tea, or a vinegar that's with a tea source, mm-hmm. that might be a kind of catch-22 here for understanding its role in kombucha.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, and for those watching who are just tuning in as well, like talking about kombucha and its interaction with tea, and whether or not tea is important for the ferment, but also you may not be aware that when you oxidize alcohol, that's a way to turn it into acetic acid, which is vinegar. And that alcohol is one of the byproducts of yeast consuming sugars. Another one is carbon dioxide. So in this sort of anaerobic environment, or this environment, this fermenting environment that doesn't have oxygen in it, you're going to create alcohol. So if you want to make your kombucha alcoholic, a simple way to do it is to just trap any, like, don't let oxygen be playing a role at all. But if you do that, then there's no SCOBY development either. So it's kind of a catch-22. You can't really make an alcoholic kombucha unless you start with a lot more sugar. You complete the development of the SCOBY, then you block oxygen so that the yeast that is developing, that's offshooting alcohol, can then produce enough to make it alcoholic. But if you keep the most of the ferment oxidized, then you're going to create acetic acid, which is vinegar. Kombucha is basically vinegar, is the long and short of it, and that's why Jared Varani is bringing up vinegar. For those of you who weren't making the connection between kombucha and vinegar, kombucha is essentially a vinegar. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Okay, there's there's about 3 minutes left here with you, Jared. Is there sort of like any final thoughts you wanted to sort of bring to the discussion, or like kind of wrap this up a little bit, and or anything you'd like to say to the viewers that are watching around the world?
Yeah, I think this might be a good opportunity to think about the future. And I think there will be a growing need for kombucha to fill a lot of roles in a market of beverage consumption, whereby we bring people together in more positive ways. And barring the global pandemic and that future implication. But I think considering kombucha in the future, and I think as we understand more about the effect on our microbiome, I think I'm curious to see what the future has in store.
Awesome. Yeah, likewise. Yeah, really fascinated by where the journey goes, for certain. Ryan, did you have anything that you wanted to say here at the end before we sign off?
No, it's just that anytime you can think up of a question, I think it's always fun to throw it at Jared Verani, because you're just like, what about a keg? What about a cask? What about a this? What about a that? And I feel like he's already been thinking about it and just wants to take it further. So thanks for indulging that.
Appreciate that. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, no, amazing. Yeah, really, I feel the same way. It's always a treat talking deep with you, sir. Thank you for coming on the 2020 Victoria Tea Festival Revival, and 2021. We'll see what it has in store, but we might just see you there as well. Hey.
Yes. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing both of you sometime soon.
Fantastic. All right. You guys, Ryan's staying with us. He's here for the whole rigmarole. But you take care, Jared.
Good luck. I'll be tuning in.
Awesome. Cool.
Great way to start the day.
Fantastic. Take care. Bye, Jared.
See ya.
Okay. So that was Jared Verani. Jared Verani helped to found the kombucha program at my company, Jagasilk. Really fun having him on, talking about the role that tea plays in fermentation. One of our viewers says real old pu'er can have a vinegar smell. I'm certain that there's some parallels here that would be lovely to discuss with Jared Verani in the future. You want to take it from here, Ryan?
All right. Yeah, perfect. So thank you to Jared Verani for just taking us through the I love kombucha, so it's always one of my favorite talks. But coming up next is Kevin Gascong, coming to us live from French Canada again. And he's going to be talking to us via his company association with Camellia sinensis. And his talk specific is going to be, he's just going to let us know what he knows, and we're going to pick his brain until the clock ticks out. So if you catch us in 15 minutes from now, we'll be right here waiting for you as the sun rises around 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So just stay tuned, and thanks for being part of this.